Welcome to my YouTube channel where I discuss topics related to data science. In the previous videos, principal component analysis was used to reduce the dimensionality of the data, followed by K-means and hierarchical clustering to identify groups within the reduced dataset. In this presentation, another important clustering algorithm DBSCAN will be introduced. Unlike the earlier methods, DBSCAN is based on the density of data points rather than distances to predefined cluster centers or hierarchical merging. It is particularly useful because it can discover clusters of arbitrary shapes while automatically identifying outliers. Agenda. This presentation begins with the introduction to DBSCAN and the principles behind density-based clustering. The core concepts of the algorithm will then be explained before demonstrating a complete implementation in Python using the scikit-learn library within Google Colab. Finally, the strengths and limitations of the algorithm will be discussed, followed by some concluding remarks on where DBSCAN fits within the broader family of clustering methods. DBSCAN stands for Density-Based Spatial Clustering of Applications with Noise. The algorithm groups densely packed data points into the same cluster by examining the local density surrounding each observation. Unlike K-means, DBSCAN does not assume that clusters are spherical. It also differs from hierarchical clustering because it does not build a hierarchy that requires a manual cutoff point. Another important advantage is that the method is robust to outliers, which can be identified automatically as noise. The key idea behind DBSCAN is straightforward. For each point in the dataset, the algorithm examines the neighborhood within a radius called epsilon. If this neighborhood contains at least a specified minimum number of points known as MinPts, the point is considered to lie in a dense region and may become part of a cluster. Consequently, DBSCAN requires only two parameters. The first is epsilon. This defines the radius used to examine the neighborhood around each point and is used to assess the local density. The second is MinPts, which specifies the minimum number of data points that must fall within the epsilon radius before the point is classified as a core point, including itself. DBSCAN can build clusters of different shapes. The shape need not be spherical. The algorithm can also identify outliers or noise. Core, border, and noise points. Understanding these three types of points is essential to understanding DBSCAN. A core point has enough neighboring observations within the epsilon radius to satisfy the minimum density requirement. These points form the backbone of a cluster. A border point does not have enough neighbors to qualify as a core point, but it lies within the neighborhood of a core point and it is therefore assigned to that cluster. Finally, a noise point is neither a core point nor connected to one. Such observations are treated as outliers and are excluded from the final clusters. The illustration highlights the epsilon radius surrounding a core point. Any observations within this radius contribute to determining whether the density threshold has been reached. Main steps of DBSCAN. The DBSCAN algorithm begins by selecting an arbitrary point in the dataset. It then examines all neighboring points within the epsilon radius. If the selected point satisfies the minimum density requirement, it becomes a core point and a new cluster is created or an existing cluster is expanded. If the point is merely a border point, the algorithm proceeds to examine another point. This process continues until every observation has been visited. DBSCAN uses a single global value of epsilon and min points. Consequently, neighboring clusters with different densities may sometimes be merged into a single cluster if they are sufficiently close together. This is a limitation of DBSCAN. Any remaining observations that cannot be connected to a core point are labeled as noise. This automatic detection of outliers is one of the major advantages of DBSCAN over many traditional clustering algorithms. The implementation follows several straightforward steps. First, the required Python libraries are imported. The old faithful dataset is then loaded and the variables are standardized so that both contribute equally to the distance calculations. DBSCAN requires appropriate values for epsilon and min points. In this example, several combinations of these parameters are evaluated using nested loops and the Silhouette score is used to select the best performing model. Finally, the optimal DBSCAN model is fitted to the data using the DBSCAN function of the cluster module in scikit-learn package. The model is configured with the optimal values of epsilon and min points together with the Euclidean distance metric. The resulting clusters and detected outliers are visualized using the scatter plot. The flowchart summarizes the main steps involved in implementing DBSCAN in Python. The dataset is first imported and standardized. A nested loop is then used to determine the optimal values of epsilon and min points. The DBSCAN model is subsequently fitted to the dataset and the resulting clusters and any detected outliers are finally visualized. The code for DBSCAN in Google Colab is shown. The often used libraries are first imported. These include pandas and numpy for data handling as well as matplotlib for visualization. The other relevant modules from scikit-learn for pre-processing, clustering and evaluation are imported later. The old faithful dataset which has been uploaded at the sample data folder is then imported. The head function is then used to display the first 5 rows of the dataset. This provides a quick inspection of the imported data and helps verify that it has been loaded correctly. Because the DBSCAN relies on distance calculations, feature scaling is important. Here, standardization is applied so that both variables have zero mean and unit variance before clustering begins. A scatter plot of the standardized data is then produced. Next, DBSCAN class is imported from the cluster module while the Silhouette score function is imported from the matrix module of the scikit-learn library. Instead of selecting epsilon and min points by trial and error, A range of values is explored systematically using nested loops. Models that produce only a single cluster are ignored, while the Silhouette score is calculated for the remaining solutions. The parameter combination producing the highest Silhouette score is retained. Once the optimal parameters have been identified, the DBSCAN model is fitted using the Euclidean distance metric and the cluster labels are assigned to each observation. The unique cluster labels are then displayed to verify the clustering results. Finally, the clustering plots are then displayed. In this example, two clusters are identified. The scatter plot can also reveal any observations classified as noise if present. The Python code is implemented in Google Colab as shown next. Before running the code, the CSV file must first be uploaded from its folder to the Google Colab environment. Once the file has been uploaded, the code is executed and the DBSCAN algorithm is applied. The optimized results obtained earlier highlighted here. The scatter plot on the left shows the standardized variables before clustering, where the circle samples appear to be possible outliers. However, the DBSCAN results on the right identify two distinct clusters without classifying any samples as noise. The optimized values of epsilon, mean points, and the corresponding silhouette score obtained from the nested loop are also shown. Like any clustering technique, DBSCAN has both strengths and limitations. One important advantage is that the number of clusters does not need to be specified in advance. The algorithm can also discover clusters with irregular shapes while naturally identifying outliers as noise. In addition, DBSCAN is relatively simple to configure since only two parameters are required. However, selecting suitable values for epsilon and min points can still be challenging. The algorithm also performs less effectively when clusters have substantially different densities. Furthermore, like many distance-based methods, its performance tends to deteriorate in high-dimensional datasets because of the curse of dimensionality. This presentation has introduced DBSCAN as one of the major density-based clustering algorithms. Unlike K-means and hierarchical clustering, DBSCAN does not require the number of clusters to be specified in advance and is capable of identifying outliers automatically. In this example, after optimizing the values of epsilon and min points, the algorithm identified two distinct clusters. Interestingly, no observations were classified as outliers, indicating that all samples belong to sufficiently dense regions of the dataset under the selected parameters. As this series has demonstrated, no single clustering algorithm is universally the best. The choice of algorithm should always depend on the structure of the data and the objectives of the analysis. In future presentations, additional machine learning techniques for clustering, classification, and regression will be explored to further broaden our understanding of these methods. Thank you for your time. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep turning data into knowledge.